Martin Riopel now is our next presenter. He has his doctor's. He's a doctorate here at Laval University. Thank you.
We'll talk about volume estimation models. Thank you very much. Now I have the pleasure of talking to you about a team project which we have conducted for and with the Forest Inventory Directorate and the Regional Operations Directorate. So more specifically, I worked a lot as a team with Dave Munger, who made his presentation yesterday and who was daring enough to emphasize very much my performance, which I'm supposed to have today. So I'm a bit nervous. Expectations are high. He set the bar very high for me. So in order to situate you a little bit compared to what you've seen yesterday in the LiDAR suite, the goal of my work was more to establish statistical models, which is the left side part here, to determine dendrometric variables, which will allow users to get really useful information about volume, quadratic average diameter, without necessarily having to put plots during the LiDAR's flight. So that gives you an information base, and when we come up to prepare the mapping, we will already have some information about volume. All that information is based on what we get with the LiDAR data and with the mapping data coming from the forest map. The goal of the project was to produce information on cells 10 meters by 10 meters that have 7 meters or more in height. Our goal was to estimate dendrometric variables for those cells, 10 by 10, with more than 7 meters in height. And this should be done for the whole Quebec forest, but mostly for the Quebec boreal forest, for any type of stand, and without using synchronous sampling that would be done at the same time as the LiDAR flights. In order to do that, we have to start with some basic assumptions, which are, first of all, the average height of the dominant or co-dominant study trees in the department plots. They have to be close to the LiDAR height that is evaluated with LiDAR Suite, with the LiDAR Suite software. So that's the first assumption. If that doesn't work, we won't get the right volumes ultimately. The second assumption is that we take information to evaluate the density class of the cover as evaluated with the LiDAR. That also has to connect closely with the information obtained from my plots with the terrestrial layer. We have a density class evaluation. And finally, if we want an efficient species distribution, we want to check whether the mapping appellation can be used to divide the volumes by different species categories. In order to calibrate the models, we used more than 45,000 plots for the boreal forests. Here we're talking about the white balsam fir stands and spruce stands. Those are plots made during the third and fourth inventory. So in these, we take the average height, the density class, and in terms of terrestrial class, the type of cover, the main species that comes from the group of species. So, for example, if we have a spruce and fir stand, we will say in the model whether it's a spruce stand. We'll say it's a spruce stand in the model. And this year, we took some age-based information just to distinguish. There can be 7 meters layers that are really young, 30 years and lower, compared to other strata. And finally, in order to take into account the geographical location, we took into account the landscape unit, which is a territorial ecological classification unit developed by the Inventory Directorate. in the application, the idea is that the height and the density class will be based on the LiDAR data, and the other pieces of information will be based on what we have in the forest map. And all of that on a scale of 10 meters by cells of 10 meters by 10 meters. The outputs that are generated for now will be the marketable volume, all species taken together, that we called V, then the proportion of that volume per species for fir tree, spruce, jack pine, and tamarack, intolerant deciduous trees, and the large groups of species such as the hardwood species. So we would have the average volume per stem per group of species, the proportion of that volume, which is 16 centimeters or more for trees that have a DHB of 16 and more, 24 plus, the quadratic average diameter, all that with a purpose to really specify well all the dendrometric characteristics. If we want to eventually have a distribution by species, we can take the quadratic average diameter to try to evaluate whether there's a sawing potential for a sawmill, so that we create a model where we ultimately will come up with a prediction matrix or a forecast matrix where we will have one piece of data for each height class as calculated by LiDAR, and for each landscape unit, density class, and cover type, we will be able to evaluate the volume that is there and all the information we're interested in. And at the end, that matrix will be joined with the 10 meter by 10 meter cell layer, the raster layer, to eventually come up with an interesting form of mapping. In order to make a study like that, it's very important to have a validation basis, because we're not calibrated directly with LiDAR plots, ground plots that were surveyed with LiDARs. And our only possible validation possibility are harvesting sites. So the information we got is the harvesting volumes per groups of species, the boundaries of the treatments that were conducted. It's important to have a good precision about what was left standing, what were the treatments, the cutting boundaries, the boundaries of the cutting areas, and we also need an inventory about the volume that was protected. If there was a cut with protection of the small marketable stems, I need to know the volume of the trees that were left standing. All this to come with an underuse figure that will allow us to compare the LiDAR volume and the actually harvested volume in the harvesting site. For the moment, for the part of the study that I'm presenting to you today, this is the green part, white birch, balsam fir, and spruce stands. We have 17 work sites available, especially in the Lac Saint-Jean area, but we also have harvesting sites at the Montmorency Experimental Forest. These sites vary between 50 and 3,000 hectares in surface area, and that really makes it possible for me to validate the models. This is just to talk to you a little bit about the subdivision in terms of regional landscape units. The model is a linear regression model with a random effect included. And within that random effect, we make sure that there is a fine adjustment of predictions on the basis of the landscape units. So that in total, in that whole section, we have 73 different landscape units. So we have to come up with a good level of precision for each. In terms of the results, here is an example of a curve that was created by the models. So you see here that's the volume for all species taken together based on the dominant height, the height that dominates on the plot. So the LiDAR height as evaluated on our raster. And we have the density class effect. Those are density classes that we use here in Quebec with letters A, B, C, D, A being the strongest density and D being the lowest density. So you can see that the model can be adapted to use the density class and height. Here you have an example for spruce stands of density B. All the landscape units in Quebec, the curves for all the landscape units in Quebec, you can see that these curves have to really be adapted from one region to another because there are quite a lot of disparities, significant disparities from one region to another. And you can see it here on this map. In red are the areas where there is the least volume for a spruce stand of B density and 15 meters height. But as we move east, you tend to have more volume, for example, in the Gaspé Peninsula or in areas located at high altitude. And this is due to the fact that in the east, for a given height, trees are slightly bigger in the east because of the tapering. The results is that we used 18 harvesting sites, and we used these sites to validate the volumes. And for the time being, it's going very well. The average error is 0 cubic meter per hectare, so there's no bias. And the average precision is 97%. That means that we have approximately plus or minus 3.1 cubic meters in all 18 harvesting sites we have evaluated on average. All work sites have a precision greater than 90%, and 13 out of 18 had a precision of more than 95%. If you want to see the plot graphically, on the x-axis you have the value measured in the work site, and along the y-axis is the value as measured by the LiDAR. So you see that there's a good gradient from 80 to 200 cubic meters per hectare, and the LiDAR model can really position you in the right place. The one-on-one straight line is the straight line you see in black. But all that, to come to results like this, it's really important to help yourself and to support yourself with good validation sites. For the time being, we have 18 of those sites, and we don't cover the whole study area. So it will be important in the future, in a near future, to have harvesting sites in all the other sectors to eventually have a good precision so as to validate the model, and also maybe so as to be able to make adjustments depending on regional realities. But for the time being, it works very well in the Lac Saint-Jean area. Let me now, this is an example where we went from the LiDAR height for heights only, and to the right we have the balsam fir spruce volume predicted for our harvesting site. So we get a pixelization of 10 meters by 10 meters, and that gives us a good idea of where the volume is located in the field. Conclusion, this is a good example of how we can use a lot of the plots that have been created in the last few years. We're talking about the third or fourth time we come back to those plots in order to establish volumes to help us in our volumes, in our models. And that's encouraging because the performance of the models is very good if we go with the validation sites that we used. In the boreal forest, it seems to be a promising method, and it's really interesting also because it's very cheap. It doesn't cost much. It doesn't require you to go to on the ground to estimate the volumes. If you have your LiDAR value, you can get at least a basic idea of the volume. Still interesting to try to have plots all concomitantly with the LiDAR to have something more precise and more localized, closer to your harvesting site. Now, in order to generalize the method a little bit and to support that method, if the method is well done for your region, it's really very important for us to get other validation work sites to validate the method, but also to validate the limitations. Currently, we're wondering whether we'll be able to apply this really in the deciduous forest. For the time being, we have only 2 validation harvesting sites in the yellow birch balsam fir stands. So I'm waiting until I have more to elaborate on that deciduous part. In terms of future perspectives, what's the outlook? The Wood Marketing Bureau already uses a distribution matrix by products to estimate the saw volume per tree, the sawable volume per tree. So that's one of the matrices which we would like to include in our volume estimations in order to break down volumes per product. So that fits well in the adding value to the product value from harvesting to the user. In deciduous or mixed stands, we need more validation sites. In the longer term, what will become interesting probably is that as the work continues, as we get more validation sites, things will become more and more interesting because we'll be able to refine the method. We'll be in a better position to refine the methods, and if we have more plots in the places that have been covered by LiDAR, we would be able to refine the dendrometric descriptors with the LiDAR height so that it fits actually with the measured dendrometric value measured in the forest. Same thing for the density class, which remains a method that it would be interesting to validate from plot to plot. So, I would like to thank all those who got involved, who gave us their survey data to allow us to evaluate and validate in validation sites, the management units, the Wood Marketing Bureau, the BMMB, and the cooperation of everyone is very important with all the partners if we want to get quickly data for the future. So if you have interesting things, sites we might not have on the map, please contact us. We're always interested, and we will be glad to add this to our list. Thank you very much.